It is summer 1708, and in the fields outside the Flemish town of Oudenarde, yet another battlefield lies strewn with dead. These men have come from Scotland, Ireland, England, France, Spain, Italy, and Germany, with many thousands of Dutch and Swiss and other nationalities among them. Once more, the Allied armies under the command of John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, and Eugene, Prince of Savoy, have triumphed over a Franco-Bavarian army. And yet again, as has happened several times in the past years, France's greatest commanders and most valorous troops flee to a defensible place of refuge, while Marlborough gears up for an assault on their homeland and the kingdom of the Sun King himself. We often marvel at the tactical complexities of early modern-era battles, but rarely is the trauma soldiers suffered during the War of the Spanish Succession mentioned. Physicians called it the Swiss disease, characterized by profound melancholy and inability to function. In our own lives, our thoughts and emotions are molded by relationships, opportunities, but also uncertainty and major life events. That's why we encourage anyone who is overwhelmed to seek support. Perhaps talk to a friend, a colleague, or professional like the paid partner of today's video. BetterHelp matches you with a credentialed therapist based on your preferences, and you can switch therapist anytime at no additional cost. You can communicate however you feel comfortable, by phone, video, or text. We are aware that online therapy certainly isn't for everyone, but we also believe that it can be helpful to many. Recent surveys show that 86% would use their service again. They are now also certified by HITRUST, a globally recognized standard for strict protection of healthcare data security. If you feel BetterHelp might be helpful, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/HistoryMarche to get 10% off your first month. After resting his army for 2 days at Oudenarde, Marlborough moves to Vervik, and there he and Eugene, along with Ouwerkerk, the commander of the strong Dutch contingent, discuss their campaign strategy in the wake of their latest great victory. Convinced that he has taken some 20,000 in dead, wounded, and captured from the French army of Flanders, Marlborough is adamant that the time is ripe for an aggressive attack on the heart of France. They can now move past the lines of defences and fortresses that Louis has painstakingly constructed along his frontier at the Spanish Netherlands without hindrance, and strike at Paris itself. Marlborough is certain that all he will need is access to a port such as Abbeville for supply from the home country. Unfortunately for the hyper-aggressive Marlborough, neither Eugene nor his Dutch allies are of the same mind. At the very least, Eugene argues, they will need a defensible supply depot in addition to the port for stocks, stores, and provisions. He suggests the capture of Lille, just 10 miles from their current location. Seeing that he has little other option, Marlborough accedes, and the siege of Lille commences within days. The reduction of Lille is no simple matter, however. Through a combination of its Vauban-designed defences and stalwart defenders, the siege lasts from the second week of August until near the middle of December. Perhaps just as significantly, Henri de Nassau, Lord Ouwerkerk, who has been in ostensible joint command of the Anglo-Dutch army for several years, and played an instrumental role in the victories at Ramillies and Oudenarde particularly, dies in the aftermath of the siege. He is replaced as commander of the Dutch troops by the Count of Tilly, and Marlborough struggles to inspire his reticent allies begin once more. Yet again, there will be no lightning campaign for the Duke. Instead, these months are spent blocking the united armies of Vendôme and his own nephew, the Duke of Berwick, from flanking him and destroying the siege force. He and his allied army are no doubt glad to get out of the elements for the cold months. This winter is one of the worst in memory, and the incessant frost and then rains destroy crops and bring famine to many places. The kingdom worst hit by this catastrophe is France, already stretched to the utmost in terms of manpower and army supply. Tens of thousands of men have been lost every year for the best part of the decade since the beginning of the War of the Spanish Succession, and hundreds of thousands have been drafted into military service to fight on the numerous fronts where France is forced to conduct operations. Louis's kingdom is now drained, exhausted, and starving to death, and the Allies, British and Dutch in particular, warn that invasion will be prompt should Louis not accede to their demands. With little other choice, the Sun King agrees readily to review a list of 40 demands, which includes the elimination of all French territorial claims, the withdrawal of French armies from Spain, and the dismantling of the border fortresses along the Rhine and Flanders borders. So desperate is Louis to make peace that he will leave his wasting kingdom defenseless, but with the streets and villages filling with the bodies of the dead and dying, in tandem with those fallen on the battlefield, there is no other course left to him. The only article to which Louis will not sign his name is the demand to remove his grandson Philippe from Spain within a grace period of 8 weeks. Philippe has been crowned king in Madrid and enjoys a very prominent support amongst the peoples of that kingdom. Louis argues that he does not possess the means to remove Philippe, and so it is something that he cannot guarantee, a sentiment to which both Marlborough and Eugene are in agreement. It is not enough for England's government, however, and the decision is taken to renew hostilities yet again, until such time as Louis will agree to all Allied commands without condition. Marlborough and Eugene chaff at what they see as this political nitpicking, but the army they command helps assuage any qualms. They now bring 197 squadrons of cavalry alone in Marlborough's army, to which Eugene can add another 123. In infantry, Marlborough is fielding 129 battalions, and Eugene a further 66. They will march with 25,000 more soldiers than they had at the beginning of the campaign that brought the triumph at Oudenarde. All told, somewhere in the region of 120,000 fighting men. With rain lashing into their faces, they set off south from Lille, straight toward the French lines of defense, with all of Marlborough's habitual belligerence. But the French army facing them is not the disheartened and weak rabble that the Allies might have imagined during the winter peace talks. Instead, it is a newly revitalized and motivated force, outnumbered with perhaps 90,000 men in its ranks, but its spirit has been sparked by the removal of the squabbling commanders Vendôme and Burgundy, and their replacement with Marshal Claude Louis Hector de Villars, an able and skilled general well known to Marlborough and Eugene. It was Villars who outmaneuvered Marlborough at the Moselle in 1705, and won good victories early in the war at Friedlingen and Hochstadt over the Imperial Army. The Allied commanders know that they will have a contest rather than a walkover against this particular Frenchman in the coming campaign. In spite of Villars' restoration of French morale in the face of Allied insults and victories, Marlborough and Eugene are resolved to metaphorically piss in his morning coffee, and they conceive a little con job for the new arrival. While the main Allied army continues its march toward the French lines in the vicinity of Courtrai, the artillery train is sent to Menin, giving the distinct indication that Marlborough is going to put Ypres to the siege. Instead, once the French have had just enough time to react to this development, Marlborough and Eugene's main columns abruptly turn in the other direction and make for Tournai, where Villars has made the mistake of withdrawing fully 3,000 men from the garrison in the belief that they will be needed in Ypres. The Allied siege lines are established before Villars can change the direction of his own companies and attempt a defence. In spite of the coup in wrong-footing Villars and giving his hot beverage a little extra tang, Tournai puts up a momentous fight, and the siege lasts from the final week of June to the first week of September. The rotten weather continues throughout, with men fighting up to their midriffs in water, and subterranean explosions from tunnelers and sappers a constant terror. Villars stabs at the besiegers from the far side, but he lacks the supplies and force to make an all-out attack. When the city finally does fall, the French commander can be forgiven for assuming that the Allies will rest their troops and consolidate their host before moving again. But Marlborough immediately sends out a force of 60 cavalry squadrons, riding full tilt toward Mons, with a similarly strong formation on foot. Once more Villars is caught out, but as the rest of the Allied army moves almost as quickly from Tournai to join their vanguard at Mons, he makes a feint of his own, seeming to approach Mons first from the western side, then abruptly turning himself and fighting his way through a cavalry host, and eventually pitching up on the northeast of a village by the name of Malplaquet. While most of the Allied army have come into position on the eastern side of Mons at the close of the first week of September, Villars is now to their southwest, firmly entrenched just 2 days later on the 9th. The French set to work without pause to build strong fortifications along their line. When Marlborough and Eugene ride into sight of France's last army, they immediately see that Villars is offering them battle, a game they presumed he would avoid throughout this campaign. This should be a cause of relief to the two generals, but they see that Villars has chosen his ground very well. This is not the wide plains of Blenheim or Ramillies. Villars has learned from those follies. Instead, he has set his line in a mile-long clearing between two forests, known as the Aulnoy Gap, on ground that is dotted and broken with ditches and hedges, significant impediments to any advancing army. In piercing, blinding summer rain, Marlborough and Eugene ride back and set to work assembling their huge army into a coherent formation. One more victory, and the road to France will lie wide open and undefended. They begin to work on bringing their forces together, with Eugene's riding from Bossu and Marlborough's some distance north of the Gap, on wider ground bisected by a number of rivers and tributaries. The 10th of September dawns, but though the Allied army is largely assembled, its commanders make the decision to hold until the day following. Similarly, Villars will also be criticised for not attacking on the 9th, when the Allied forces were still not amalgamated. Throughout the morning and afternoon, there is the sound of axes and saws on timber from the dark woods. The French are felling logs by the score, making the infantrymen on the opposite pickets wonder what they will come across when the order to march is given to them. In the French command headquarters, Villars is exultant. Never defeated in battle, even against Marlborough, he has wanted a field combat since his appointment, and he has now finally received permission to do it. The Duc de Boufflers, known for his own expert generalship, has arrived with letters from King Louis, giving Villars leave to prevent the siege and capture of Mons by any means necessary, for its fall would indeed open an avenue into the French heartland for the enemy. Honorably, Boufflers offers to serve under Villars in the fight to come, even though he technically outranks the younger man. Villars gratefully accepts and posts Boufflers to command the right wing with 63 battalions. On the opposite side, Gosbriand commands 17 battalions on the very far left, while Villars himself takes command of the centre and inner left directing 55 battalions in total. Within these formations are the Swiss, Irish and Bavarian Guards, along with the Garde Française. There is both a front and reserve line of infantry, with the cavalry in the rear, ready to countercharge, its squadrons including elite gendarmerie and the Maison de Roi. These units have had their honour impugned by Marlborough's armies at the battles of Ramillies and Oudenarde, and they are itching for revenge. With units of infantry posted all the way into both the Sars and Lanière Wood, as well as almost as far north as the Blairon and Terry Wood, Villars establishes his headquarters in Malplaquet village itself. Worrying about an Allied attempt to flank around the woods on his right, Villars orders the Chevalier de Luxembourg to bring a reserve force of cavalry out to watch the trees for movement. On the far side, Marlborough's guns have arrived by the late afternoon, and an artillery exchange begins between the two sides around 3:30. The Anglo-Dutch are still waiting for Colonel Withers with 20 battalions, and there is no attempt at a serious attack that day. The guns fall silent with the dusk, and the men eat and await their fates on the morrow. Word reaches Marlborough that Withers and his 20 battalions have arrived to the northwest on the road from Tournai, but he orders that rather than continue the march and join the Allied right as he originally planned, they are to stay in place 3 miles from the main camp on the far side of the woods from the French. The next day's first light shows mist so thick that the Allied deployment is delayed until near 8 o'clock. And then the 100 guns of their host open up on the French lines. Marlborough leads perhaps 110,000 men all told, with Eugene in command as the strong right hand and the 23-year-old Prince of Orange, newly arrived on this campaign and taking overall command of the Dutch forces from Tilly on the left wing. The main contingents that will advance and destroy the French army are led by Withers, Schulenburg, Lotham, Orkney, and then Orange on the far left. Despite the difference in terrain and enemy positions from Blenheim, Ramillies and Oudenarde, Marlborough's tactics that brought untold success in those battles will remain unchanged for this contest. The Allied wings will advance and put pressure on the French flanks until such time as the enemy commander is forced to send reserves from the centre and avoid their collapse. And then a strong push through the middle will lead to the implosion of the French line and the Allies' victory once again. Thus it is that after a half-hour bombardment, a signal salvo is fired, and Schulenburg sets forth with his 40 battalions on the Allied right, marching toward the Sars Wood. He advances in 3 lines, determinedly crossing 800 yards of terrain, while further out, Withers starts to move with his battalions through the woods itself, his infantry marching in a double line, and his cavalry sweeping further around in an arc to catch any units that may be entrenched amidst the trees. All too suddenly, the reality of this presumption is confirmed when a bristling line of French fire opens up from the gloom of the wood, and Allied soldiers across the line fall and struggle to return fire at an unseen enemy. The advance halts in the face of this savage volley. Worse, the oncoming Allies are further stalled to an even greater degree by felled timbers and other snares designed to stop the attack and allow the French to shoot them down at ease. Further on, Lotham has the same experience, and the Saar Woods descend into a nightmarish exchange of musket ball and bloody bayonet charge. On the opposite side of the battlefield, the Prince of Orange is leading his 30 battalions, including Scots fighting under the Dutch banner, on the march into the heart of the French right wing, positioned amidst the boughs of the Lanière Woods. 100 yards or so from the tree line, an awful cacophonous roar strikes their ears, and fiery mouths open in the distance. It is a concealed artillery battery, the French hiding no fewer than 20 heavy guns in their earthworks and shredding the defenseless Dutch line with remorseless salvos. With the valor so characteristic of the European armies of the day, the Dutch reform and march again, only to be blasted once more. The young prince marches with them, but after half an hour it is clear that no good will come from the slaughter, and the Dutch withdraw. Boufflers, exultant at his gunner's handiwork, has his men fix bayonets for a counter-attack. But the Allied reserve cavalry to the rear of the right wing under Frederick, Prince of Hesse-Kassel and future King of Sweden, rides forth and sternly dissuades any such attempt on their allies. Looking over the now corpse-strewn field, the Dutch alone have suffered 5,000 casualties in just 30 minutes of fighting. It has become evident that Villars has anticipated Marlborough's tactics, and the entire field is a warren of trenches constructed in depth, obstacles, and firing lines specially constructed so as to create murderous cross volleys for the advancing enemy. At about 10:30, Marlborough and Eugene concentrate their attention on Lotham's stalled attack, which they reinforce with a brigade under the Duke of Argyll and 2 further infantry battalions, covered in turn by 30 squadrons of Dutch cavalry, to forestall a counter-attack. It is only with these extra units and a supreme and violent push is Lotham finally able to muscle the French back and take control of his sector of the field. 7,000 men have died in the maneuver. Seeing the strength of the Dutch cavalry, Villars decides against an immediate counterattack and instead sends 12 battalions to reinforce the French left against Schulenburg's offensive, which is continuing to turn the woods into a charnel house. Marlborough and Eugene, meanwhile, have ridden to the Prince of Orange's position and are horrified at the sight that awaits them. Marlborough himself has to convince the Prince not to ride in a third failed attack, and instead to merely maintain pressure on the enemy so that the centre will eventually open up to a final charge. Thus satisfied that the Prince will not destroy a third of the army in doomed forays, Marlborough and Eugene return to the centre to oversee the greater part of the battle. On their right, Withers has begun to make his presence felt, with his cavalry now well into the fighting on the French flank, and Schulenburg is also keeping up the attacks deeper into the trees. Villars, beginning to waver, appeals to Boufflers to send reinforcements, but the old general denies any units that will sap the strength of his thus far successful line, and so Villars must once more send men from the centre. This is the very development he had wished to avoid, but he finds himself with no choice. He sends the Irish Brigade into the woods on the left, and there a remarkable event occurs as they join the line and come into contact with the Royal Regiment of Foot of Ireland, fighting under Withers. The 2 Irish companies, one fighting for France and the other for Britain, set about each other with the fury reserved only for fraternal traitors. Still not convinced that the left will hold, Villars sends a Bavarian battalion after the Irish, and the line holds for the moment. Sensing that an Allied breakthrough on the left wing is still imminent, Villars goes all in on that sector, and he begins moving almost the entirety of his central companies out to the flank, forming up so as to catch the Allies when they come out of the woods, or else launch them in a massive counterattack. Soon they are almost 50 battalions strong and awaiting their moment. By this time, Marlborough and Eugene have moved to Lotham's position to oversee preparations for the next stage of his advance, when it is brought to Marlborough's attention that the French centre is currently unmanned. He promptly orders that Orkney occupy these positions, and the command is carried out almost without firing a shot. It is a momentous development, but Villars is still waiting a little way off with his 50 battalions for the ambush. It is exactly the sort of ruse and surprise that Marlborough's opposing commanders have been incapable of mounting in previous battles, and thus completely unexpected at this juncture. But it is not to be. Around this time, in the middle of the day, two of the highest commanders on the field are injured, with opposite outcomes. Eugene, still with Marlborough on the right side of the field near Lotham's position, takes a glancing shot to the head, but he refuses medical aid and carries on organising his units. Behind the Saar's Wood, waiting to pounce, Villars is not so lucky. He is shot through the left knee, and while he also continues at his post, he loses consciousness sometime afterward and is brought from the field. The French have lost their commander, and direction for the army now falls to Boufflers, who is detached from the majority of the host out on the French right wing. Learning of Villars' injury and his new duty, Boufflers immediately calls up the elite French cavalry squadrons and makes an attack on the central positions now held by the Anglo-Dutch. A fierce and grueling battle develops, with Boufflers himself charging the enemy half a dozen times, and the English and other companies using every weapon available to defend themselves. They are saved by 10 cannon brought into position just in time, which decimate the French attack and take the sting from their onslaughts. Nevertheless, both Boufflers and Orkney continue their lethal tussle, with charge and countercharge across the increasingly churned up mud of the field. Marlborough and Eugene continue to push reinforcements across the centre and left, so that eventually the Allied cavalry numbers fully 30,000 men, and the pressure is intense. While this is taking place, 10 squadrons on the far right of the Allied army emerge finally from the Saar's Woods, only to run into Villars' ambush position, and they too are shredded and forced to withdraw. Reluctant now to leave the trees of the wood, the Allies keep their pressure on the fringe where Lotham is in command, and this approach appears to be bearing fruit. The break comes in two actions. On the Allied left, the Prince of Orange launches a third attack on the now reduced French positions in the Lanière Wood, overcoming the defences that so badly mauled his companies that morning. And these columns threaten to envelop Boufflers' formations that are attacking the centre. At about the same moment, the entire French left, now missing its commander, is given the order to fall back and retreat. Its new general, Jacques-François de Chastenay de Puysegur, the lieutenant general whose conservative actions at Oudenarde led to the entire French left wing remaining immobile, while the rest of the army collapsed around it, is worried that Eugene of Savoy's ever-growing force of cavalry will be too strong to withstand. Boufflers, alerted that the left wing has now left the field and that his right is in danger of being overrun now the Prince of Orange has the free run of the woods, is left with no option but to retreat himself, leaving the field to the exhausted and shattered Allies. It is another victory for Marlborough and Eugene, but one that comes with a cost that shocks Europe. The bloodiest day of a very bloody war, Malplaquet claims a horrific 25,000 Allied casualties. The French, though they conceded the field, have lost less than half that number. Yet again there will be no march on Paris, for Marlborough's army is too battered to move, and Europe has gained a new example of that old term, Pyrrhic victory. Everyone now prays for an end to the killing, but no one save the highest elites in the palaces and parliaments of London, Paris, The Hague, and Madrid can make any difference to the plight of the ordinary man in the field. I appreciate you being here for the video, please give that subscribe button a gentle medieval slap and tickle the like button to appease the almighty algorithm. It will help out the channel greatly. Cheers.